Of course, many of us are eagerly anticipating the reveal for the Nintendo Switch 2. And once we get the reveal, we also expect to have the release date, the launch window. And many of us are hoping it's really not that far off. Sales are down this year, reviews for Nintendo's biggest best games are down this year, and interest in Nintendo has been waning. But once Nintendo shows off their next new console with their new batch of next generation games, things are sure to pick up again. And it really should come as no surprise that interest has been waning though. This has been a long generation. Most generational gaps for Nintendo have been 5 to 6 years. However, when we go back to the beginning, they did wait a fair bit longer with the initial Famicom. The initial release was in '81. It wasn't until 7 years and 4 months later did we see the Super Famicom. And if you want to take a look at Game Boy, when it launched in 1989, and how long we had to wait until Game Boy Color in 1998, we had to wait 9.5 years. So technically, there is a history where Nintendo has waited a long time, similar to how long we've waited for Switch 2. But these were the first iterations for Nintendo's home and handheld consoles. Outside of these first examples, everything else has had shorter gaps. And yet with Switch, it launching in March of 2017, here we are in November of 2024, we are approaching the 8-year anniversary on March of 2025. And with us not having even received a trailer on this console yet, it seems unlikely that the console can be launching this March. Not counting Game Boy, this is the longest gap we've ever seen between console generations ever from Nintendo. So it raises the question, how much longer are we going to wait? What do we know about the launch window for Switch 2? There is a bit more new info out there now, so let's dive into this conversation. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart. The internet can be both a fun and educational resource. It's incredible. But also, there are many dangers, which is why it's recommended that you have a VPN. Using a VPN is like wearing pants. All the important stuff stays private and secure when you step your foot outside. And a VPN covers your whole online activity, which is why today we're talking about Surfshark. Surfshark in particular keeps the whole household connected and secure. You can even use the global server selection to pick a different country when watching one of your favorite streaming apps. Just the other day I realized that Friends, one of my favorite sitcoms, is no longer on Netflix, but through Surfshark I can pick a different country where Friends is available and still enjoy one of my favorite shows. Surfshark also offers a 30 days money-back guarantee, so there really is no risk here when checking out this VPN. It's important to stay secure, so if you're interested, make sure to check the link in the description below, and thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. So I think it would be important for us to address the rumors regarding a holiday 2024 launch for Nintendo Switch 2. That is definitely not happening at this point, and we haven't expected it since early this year. There are a variety of different news outlets, reputable news outlets, reporting that Switch 2 would be launching in the second half of 2024, most suggesting the holidays. But in February, these same news outlets all started reporting that those plans had been changed. There was some sort of internal delay. This VGC article does a great job of summing up a variety of the reports. According to Pedro Henrique Lute Lipe, also known as PH Brazil, from 5 different separate sources he heard that they are working on games targeting Q1 2025 to launch alongside the console itself, which had internally slipped out of a previous 2024 target. And the indication here is that the 5 separate sources are different development partners for Nintendo. And then later, VGC heard from their own sources a very similar story, and so corroborated that the Switch 2 will now launch in Q1 2025. According to the sources, third-party game companies were recently briefed on an internal delay in Nintendo's next-gen launch timing, from late 2024 to early the following year. One publishing source suggested the delay was so that Nintendo could prepare stronger first-party software for the console. But then also Eurogamer corroborated the story as well. The console's launch moving into early next year, but still within the coming financial year, is designed to ensure Switch 2's launch lineup features as many titles as possible. And so what's interesting about both Eurogamer and VGC, and there are others as well, is that just a couple months back we were hearing that Switch 2 will no longer release in March. It would be April at the earliest. And there was a bit of misinformation being spread around suggesting that this idea of a Q1 launch or a March release was never in the conversations. But no, I just brought up 3 different sources that talked about this back in February, and there are more. In the case of Bloomberg, they reported that Nintendo has told some publishing executives to not expect the console until March 2025 at the earliest. Now, with this one, they're saying March at the earliest, so March is possible, but it could release a bit later. And they still also brought up that it was being said that it would be coming out in the early months of 2025. So what do we define as the early months of 2025? I guess we can chalk that up to the first half of 2025. Now, one more source I'll bring up is Nikkei. And back in February, Nikkei also reported, Nintendo will release a successor to its game console, the Nintendo Switch, in March 2025. Like the Switch, it is expected to be a console that combines both stationary and portable features. Many in the industry had predicted a release in 2024, but Nintendo prioritized securing initial stock of the successor and a selection of popular software at the time of release, including measures to prevent resale. So Nikkei actually suggested 2 different reasons why we wouldn't see Switch 2 this year. 1, because of getting the games ready, but also 2, because Nintendo wants to get an initial stock ready, a large quantity of systems, to prevent scalping and hit the ground running. Now, as I said earlier, some venues are now reporting that March is off the table. And as I also suggested earlier, there are some out there that are pretending like this March date was never in existence. I just brought up 5 different sources, many of which are considered to be reputable, that were indicating March as a strong possibility. And so I think this is an important point to make, because it does call into question the credibility of these different venues. I think there's a little bit of information is heard and then interpreted, and then perhaps interpreted slightly off, and when you have to change the date multiple times, it doesn't look good. That's just my opinion on the matter. Regardless, as we approach the actual release date, we expect that the clarity on what's actually happening will increase. And so at this point, while I don't want to completely rule out a March release, especially considering that many were suggesting that's when it would be happening, given that we haven't seen the reveal yet, it seems unlikely. But at this point, no reputable outlets have shied away from a first half of 2025 launch. So if it's not March, April, May, June are still on the table, which is really not that far off from now, and a reveal should still be coming relatively soon. And on the note of a reveal, really the best example we have is how Nintendo handled the Switch 1. They were already openly talking about the NX since 2015, but they did not give us a proper reveal of the NX, which we came to know as a Nintendo Switch, until October 20th of 2016. And then just 4.5 months later, they launched the console on March 3rd of 2017. There was a very quick turnaround. So many of us have been thinking that we're going to see a quick turnaround this time as well. But something that I think should be noted is that Nintendo back then is not Nintendo of today. For perspective, when we take a look at the Nintendo of America tweet announcing that they're going to have a preview trailer for the NX, the Switch, that post got 39,000 likes. This was the biggest news in an extremely long time for Nintendo, and it got 39,000 likes, which is a lot. But we take a look at the Nintendo Music app announcement. That got 56,000 likes, and that was just a couple weeks ago, not 7.5 years ago, so I imagine more likes will build up on this post. And the same can be said for the Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition announcement that was also just a couple weeks ago, which got 39,000 likes. the same amount of likes as the post announcing that we're about to get the reveal trailer for a new generation. So the point I'm making here is that Nintendo's social media has grown dramatically, where smaller announcements that don't really come close to the significance of a whole new generation are getting more publicity. It's just because Nintendo's a lot bigger now. And by the way, I am not trying to suggest Xenoblade Chronicles X is not a big deal. It absolutely is, but in comparison to a new generation of Nintendo, it is what it is. And so Nintendo is certainly different now. How the public responds to their announcements is very different. There's a lot more eyes on Nintendo now. There's a lot more people keeping their eyes peeled on Nintendo's social media and their movements. So perhaps Nintendo isn't going to operate in the exact same way. And I do think it should be noted that throughout the Switch generation, we have seen quicker turnarounds for a lot of different announcements. So is it reasonable to suggest that, as opposed to thinking that the Switch 2 reveal to release window could be longer than Switch 1, maybe we should be thinking it could be shorter? Especially since now Nintendo's announcements reach a far larger audience with a lot more speed. And so if it could be shorter, given that we're in November, and Nintendo has told us that they're going to be giving us an announcement on Switch 2 before the end of the fiscal year, March 31st of 2025, does that give us some idea on when we should expect the launch of the console? Well, considering that all the reports we've gotten have suggested a first half of 2025 launch, even though their credibility should be somewhat questioned, I agree. When we also consider Nintendo's faster turnarounds now, and how quick of a reveal to release it was for Switch 1, and that it seems that we're going to get this kind of reveal before the end of the fiscal year, a first half launch seems pretty reasonable. But some are skeptical that we're even going to get a proper reveal before the fiscal year because Nintendo hasn't exactly told us that. What they told us was this. This is Furukawa, president of Nintendo. We will make an announcement about the successor to Nintendo Switch within this fiscal year. And that's all we need to read from this single post here. They said an announcement. But I think what's interesting about this is that technically this post itself was an announcement. So I've argued ever since we've gone this post that to make another tweet giving us more details on Switch 2 wouldn't really fit the implication of an announcement that's being made by this post here. But we did just get an announcement that was just shown on Twitter in a very similar way about Switch 2 from Nintendo. On November 5th, we got this. This is Furukawa. At today's corporate management policy briefing, we announced that Nintendo Switch software will also be playable on the successor to Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch Online will be available on the successor to Nintendo Switch as well. Further information about the successor to Nintendo Switch, including its compatibility with Nintendo Switch, will be announced at a later date. So this also is technically an announcement, and they say that further information will be announced at a later date, and so perhaps some people might interpret this to mean that this was the announcement that Nintendo suggested back on May, and there'll be something else further later down the road, not necessarily before the end of the fiscal year. But we actually know this to not be the case. That announcement that Nintendo was referring to back in May has yet to have happened. We've actually heard more from President Shuntaro Furukawa thanks to this Mainichi article. Regarding details about the Switch successor, President Furukawa said, "There is no change to our plan to announce it during the fiscal year ending March 2025. I can't tell you anything more than that." So right there it confirms to us that they are still going to make an announcement before the end of the fiscal year, and that does not include the backwards compatibility. This information came from the same briefing where they announced the backwards compatibility. So main point to be made here is that that announcement is still likely going to be the reveal, the equivalent to what we got for the Switch 1 reveal. Maybe it's not a trailer, maybe it's a direct or a presentation, but they're going to actually show off this console, which I do think does have us leaning towards a first half launch still. And something else I think is relevant is this other part he said. I don't think that the presence or absence of a successor will have a much of an impact on customers who buy at this time. So President Furukawa was questioned on the potential impact of Switch 2 and Switch 1 sales. And this does seem to have implications for when Nintendo could announce the Switch 2. Essentially, by Furukawa saying this, The notion that Nintendo can't announce it during the holidays is kind of out the window. They can. Will they? That remains to be seen. I'm not going to predict that anymore at this point. But I think it's at least worth acknowledging that, theoretically, we could see an announcement in November or December, and they could still have a 3 to 4 month turnaround, and we could see Switch 2 still come out in March, as some reports indicated earlier this year. I would say that's unlikely at this point. I think April is the more likely earliest we see the console come out, but either way, it does seem like we are close. And before going forward here, let me just briefly ask that if you've gotten to this point, and you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. There has been an update on some customs shipping data from a Vietnam warehouse of Hosiden, one of Nintendo's partners in manufacturing. Now, this information is technically public information that's behind a paywall, and it's been shared on family boards by LIC. However, it's privated hidden content, so I can't directly read this, and I have to go by what's been said publicly from places like on Reddit and also Nintendo Prime. Some of you may be familiar with him. But essentially what's been said is that there's been a ramp up month to month. In August, 60,000 screens were received. In September, 240,000 screens have been received. So that's a lot you could have in your warehouse if you're not actually putting these together to actually mass manufacture the Switch 2. And this would just be one place. There's going to be more than one place that's going to be getting parts and putting together Switch 2. And there has been confusion about if Switch 2 has gone to mass manufacturing it. There have been some rumors that seem to have been off, and it seems like we've been close for some time, but it hasn't quite started yet, at least as of September, although it looks like they're very close to. And so the main point to be made here is that Nintendo seemingly is about to go into mass manufacturing for Switch 2. It may have already started. This information is coming from data of September from one place. I would like to point out this post from David Gibson, where he says, "No one seems to have noticed that the Nintendo assembler Hosiden is spending 2 billion yen on production equipment and 1 billion yen on automation in fiscal year 3 2025. For its major customer in amusement, Nintendo, I still expect September news and March 2025 release for next device." Now, obviously, his expectations have been off, but there has been a great deal of spending from Hosiden, a Nintendo assembler. What for? We essentially know this is for Switch 2. And so this information doesn't necessarily tell us an exact month that they're going to reveal the console or an exact month that they're going to launch the console, but what it does do is that it gives us a bit more confidence in thinking that it is close. It seems unlikely based off this information that we're going to be waiting until the holidays for Switch 2, and it seems to more so support what we've already discussed, that based off both the reports and what Nintendo themselves has told us in their history and how they revealed Switch 1, that a first half of 2025 launch is still on the table, provided there's no significant delays. But if they're already getting in parts to this significant of a quantity, I'm not even sure we're at a point where a significant delay is on the table. Now, some might be wondering, why would Nintendo skip the end of the fiscal year to launch the Switch 2? Because we have seen that sales continue to trend downwards, and as things are looking right now, Nintendo actually updated their forecast for this year to be 1 million less in overall hardware Switch sales, and we took a look at the numbers. It doesn't even look like they're going to hit that target. So Nintendo is definitely in a position where they're not going to hit their targets, and it would make sense to get something out like Switch 2 to boost their financial year right at the end. But when we take a look at the answer to question 7 from the Q&A of Nintendo's financial results briefing for the end of fiscal year March 2024, so this came out a few months ago, Furukawa said this: "This fiscal year is when we devote ourselves to preparations for the successor to Nintendo Switch. And we believe that our top priority is to both maintain the momentum of Nintendo Switch and prepare for its successor. Rather than being overly focused on single-year profits, we have positioned this as a year to prepare for the future and to implement initiatives for continued growth and long-term rise in corporate value." And so essentially what this means is that Nintendo is okay with not hitting their targets this year. They are going to try with what they have for Switch 1, but their real goal is long-term success here. They're focused on making sure that Switch 2 comes out as best it can. And so with all this in mind, I do think there is a balancing act to be had here. Doing everything you can to support Switch 1 without using any of the cards you have saved for Switch 2. And so because Nintendo isn't using perhaps their biggest best games to push Switch 1 at the end right now, we are seeing Switch struggle a little bit more, because the games that we're getting this year, while they're quality, they're not to the same level of quality as in the past, and I think in part that shows with Nintendo's recent sales. But overall, considering how late we are into the generation, Switch sales are still surprisingly strong. Usually by this point, Nintendo consoles are completely dead. We're not seeing significant drop-offs with Switch. So overall, Nintendo's doing really well. They've maintained strong success for Switch for a very long time, and it's still pretty successful all things considered, and they're just making sure they can get that Switch 2 launch correct. And so, to give you a window, I'm going to say the launch window is March at the very earliest, but more likely April, May, maybe June. I'm really thinking April or May here. But that's based off all the information we have so far. Can plans still change? Sure. Do I think they will? I'm optimistic they won't. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.